Hi everyone, Mike here from Bikes by Mike with another cycling related video. Today is Bike Maintenance Day, or Bike Accessory Maintenance Day. I'll explain the 3 most common causes of excess noise produced by the Küat piston bike rack and how to go about fixing it. Okay, let's get to it. Today's video is short and sweet, at least by my standards. I'll briefly talk about my experience with the Piston SR rack over the past 2 years, as well as my biggest gripe. I'll then explain the cause and demo the fix for the 3 most likely reasons your Küat rack is making noise. The first is a loose FastFit wheel cradle, the second is a poor fitting cable lock, and the third is a loose keeper latch that holds the tire cradle arm in place when not transporting your bike. It's been almost 2 years since I reviewed the Piston SR rooftop rack. That was an initial impressions video, not a long-term review, as I'd only tested it out for a couple weeks. I was really impressed with the rack and gave it a glowing review at the time. I still stand by that review and would still purchase it today if I was doing it all over again. But I do have a major gripe with this rack, and that is the amount of rattling noise it generates, particularly when driving on bumpy roads. While the rack didn't make all that much noise when I first bought it, in the past month it's gotten a lot worse. This is now what it sounds like with my rooftop open. Not nice. But the good news is that the fix is easy. Well, if you call 3 fixes easy. And once done, it will make your rack perfectly silent. If you own any of the versions of the Küat piston rack, you may well experience one or possibly all 3 sources of rattling noise. Let's start with the easiest one to fix. All versions of the Küat rack use the same tire wheel cradle system, which they call their FastFit wheel chock system. It's essentially a movable bracket that allows you to adjust the cradle arm to fit various sizes of bike wheels. The versions of Küat racks that come with this FastFit system are the hitch mount Piston Pro and Pro X, as well as my rooftop version, the Piston SR. So if you own any of these models, it's possible you're experiencing the same problem as me, which is the FastFit system that makes a rattling noise whenever there is no bike mounted in the rack. The good news is that this fix is super simple. All you need to do is tie the wheel chock to the upper end of the tire cradle arm. The best thing I found for this is a heavy-duty Velcro strap that's about 12 inches long. I bought a multi-pack of straps off Amazon, but you'll find them pretty much everywhere. Just secure the Velcro around both the FastFit wheel chock and the end of the tire cradle arm, making sure it's tightly cinched into place. And that's it. All the play in the system is removed and there's nothing to rattle around. And as long as you don't need to adjust the wheel chock to fit a different size wheel, you can leave the Velcro strap in place even with the bike mounted on the rack. The Piston SR rooftop rack is the only rack made by Küat where you may run into the next vibration noise. That's because this version, my version, has an integrated cable lock system that slides in and out of the wheel tray. While functionally I like this feature, from a design perspective they did not execute it very well. The cable sits very loosely within the wheel tray channel, so you hear the cable rattling within the wheel tray whenever you're driving on a bumpy road. Since you have a loose fitting cable resting on top of a hard metal surface, this is totally predictable. Küat should have found a way to insulate the cable within the tray, or just go with the method they use on their hitch mount piston racks, which is a cable that stores away off the rack. I was originally going to try applying electrical tape or heat shrink tubing to the cable to fill the gap between the cable and the wheel tray, but then realized this wouldn't work all that well because the entry point of the cable at the end of the tray is smaller than the width of the channel. So if you add extra width by adding a sleeve to the cable, it won't be able to slide in and out. With there being no easy fix to this, and since I don't use a lock all that often, I just decided to remove the cable entirely to be 100% certain I get rid of all the rattling noise. The bolts that hold the plate in place look like typical hex bolts, but they aren't. They have a little pin inside them and they go by a few different names. Security hex bolts, tamper-proof hex bolts, or sometimes pin hex bolts. To remove them, you need to use a compatible 5mm pin hex bit. These are sometimes difficult to find, so I bought a complete set off Amazon. I've included a link in the description if you want to buy one. To remove the cable, all you have to do is remove one of the end plates on the wheel tray, which then allows you to pull out the cable. So loosen and then remove each of the two security hex bolts, being careful not to strip either of the bolts in the process. With the plate off, you can now pull out and remove the cable from the slot and store it away. You can then place the plate back on the wheel tray and secure it back in place with the two bolts. The rooftop version of the piston, the Küat Piston SR, is their only bike rack that uses a latch to hold the tire arm in place when not in use, what they call the keeper. So if you don't have a Piston SR, this won't apply to you, but if you, like me, are using the SR model, then it's quite likely that you, like me, are experiencing a loose fitting latch that is causing a constant metal-on-metal rattling noise. This noise wasn't noticeable when I first started using the rack, but in the last month or so, it has gotten progressively louder. Here's what it sounds like with my sunroof open. Very irritating. Fortunately, there is a quick and inexpensive fix to this: adding silicone washers. The Küat Piston SR rack comes assembled with a keeper latch secured in place with just a single washer. Not sure why Küat only uses one washer. They only cost like 50 cents. The single washer isn't wide enough to produce a tight fit to keep the keeper from shaking around. So all I'm going to do is add at least one additional washer per piston to keep each keeper latch snugly in place. I love that word, snugly. The silicone washer that comes stock on the rack has an outer diameter of 25 millimeters or 1 inch, an internal diameter of 17 millimeters or 0.67 inch, and a width of 3 millimeters or 0.12 inch. So you need to source washers close to the same dimensions, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same, as silicone has quite a bit of stretch to it. I found some washers that are the same OD in width, but a slightly smaller inner diameter of 16 millimeters, which fits perfectly. I strongly recommend you use silicone washers and not ones made out of rubber or metal, as those won't deflect enough to give you a proper fit. There are just a few tools and supplies you'll need for this job. You need at least one and possibly two additional washers per piston. It all depends how much play you have in your latch, but you really can't go wrong by going with a total of 3 washers. You'll need a 5mm hex key to remove both piston bolts. Finally, if your bolts are seized as tight as mine were, you may need a breaker bar fitted with a 5mm hex bit to loosen the bolt. Step 1 is to remove the piston. To do this, 2 bolts need to be removed. On my rack, the bolt that attaches to the keeper latch was on so tight that I couldn't get it going with just a hex key, so I used my breaker bar to first loosen it up. Once I get it going, I use my regular 5mm hex key to fully loosen the bolt and then remove it and set it aside. Now it's time to work at the opposite end of the piston and remove the second bolt again using a 5mm hex key. For me, this bolt came off much easier than the first one, so I didn't need to use a breaker bar. Set the second bolt aside in a safe place. With both bolts removed, you can now remove the piston. It may take a bit of jiggling to get it off, but it should slide off relatively easily as there's nothing there to keep it in place. As you pull off the piston, hold the tire arm to prevent it from swinging down and potentially hitting your windshield and causing damage. This tire arm was quite stiff, but I did need to hold the other 3 tire arms from falling down when removing the other pistons. Be careful here, you have your warning. Step 2 is to fit a new washer onto the keeper latch. Start by removing the latch from its mount and put it aside. Now is a good time to remove and replace the existing washer if it's in poor condition. Time to put it all back together again. Grab 2 of your silicone washers and slip them onto their mount, flush with the tire tray. Then slip the latch back on. If you like, you can add another washer to this side of the latch to be double certain there's no vibration. Think of it as a bit of sanity insurance. Step 3 is to reassemble the piston. Slide it back onto its 2 mounts and then install each of the 2 bolts one at a time. It's not a bad idea to grease the bolts and bolt inserts with good quality all-purpose grease prior to reassembly. These parts get pounded by the elements and can easily corrode. This is especially true for me in Toronto, as I leave my rack on the car throughout the winter months and it gets covered in road salt. So any additional protection you can provide can only help. You want the bolts to be torqued quite tight, but not risking stripping the bolts. And that's it. Once the two bolts are tightened down, you are done with one side of one rack. Repeat the same process for the piston at the other end of the rack, and you are done. Your rack should now be 100% rattle-free. So that's pretty much it for today's video. If you want to try this out yourself and are having difficulty sourcing parts, I've included links in the description where you can buy the tools and supplies used in this video. If you have a piston rack, including the Piston SR like mine, let me know in the comments section if your rack is or was as noisy as mine. That's all I got for today, folks. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you're not a subscriber to this channel, please subscribe, as allow me to produce more content for all of you. See you next time. Happy rolling.